Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back. My name is Carol Redden. For those who haven't been to my channel before, I want to tell you just a little bit about myself. I've been able to help folks develop personally and professionally for the last 20 years or so. Part of that time, I was and still am a college instructor for communication classes. Part of that time, I was a director of career services for about 4.5 years. And during that time, I got to meet hundreds of employers, recruiters, HR managers, and folks to really help me understand what it is that candidates were maybe not doing or needed to start doing to either gain employment or get to that next step once they're in the job that they'd like. And then also in the last few years, I've also worked as a consultant, helping individuals and also organizations to help people thrive once they're in their employment. So that's just a little bit about my background. Today, I want to talk to you about what you can do during the interview to hopefully then get the job offer. We talked last week, if you were with me or if you haven't seen the video, I'll just refresh. We talked about 3 things that you could do before the job interview. And just to really quickly recap, those were do some research on the organization, also prepare yourself, and also prepare some really good questions that you can use during the interview. And so that brings us to today, during the interview. The 2 major things that I want to recommend that you do during the interview, first would be manage your nonverbal communication, and second would be use your resume as you go through the interview. So let's dig right into the interviewing with your nonverbal communication. When I talk with folks who ask me for help obtaining employment, they will either say one of a couple things. 1, I can't get an interview, or 2, I'm getting the interview, but I'm just not getting the job. The folks who are not able to get the interview, we backtrack and we talk about their resume and whether or not they have done that preparatory work. And so that's a separate conversation. But if you've gotten to the interview, that means you prepared yourself pretty well. What I find when I start asking people how the interview went, or interviews where they're not getting called back, they say, I'm really not sure. I'll say, well, what did you say or what did you do? And oftentimes the candidate can remember things that he or she said during the interview, but can't remember any nonverbal communication. So what I think is happening is they get so caught up in trying to say the right things, they forget to manage their persona during the interview. So I want to talk about what are some of those nonverbal elements that you can manage to at least show confidence and help you to feel a little bit better. Not everybody knows, but communication is broken down into 2 major elements. Of course, there's verbal communication, which are the words that you use. And then nonverbal communication is everything else. So that includes things like eye contact, posture. We'll talk about each of these, but posture, movement and gestures, even the tone and volume of your voice. Those are all nonverbal communication. And whether you're giving a speech or in this case, giving an interview, you can really plan some of those nonverbal communication choices so that you don't have to think about them during the interview. So we'll start with eye contact. This seems like it should be pretty easy, but I have found over the years that a lot of folks interviewing don't seem comfortable giving good eye contact. I think it's because they're intimidated. So what I would recommend is thinking of the interviewer as just somebody who's either a friend of yours, or somebody who you're just getting to know, right? Because if you've done the behind the scenes work to make sure that you are a great candidate, you're wanting to make sure this is a good fit for you. So you don't have to go into the interview thinking, man, I really hope you like me. The eye contact should be really natural and just demonstrate that you're listening. What you would not want to do with eye contact would be a lot of looking around the room when somebody's talking to you, or maybe even staring at them, giving them one of these, which we know either from dating or interviewing comes across real creepy because you're just waiting for the other person to blink, so you don't want to do that. The other thing that I find people struggle with when it comes to eye contact is during a panel interview. They're not really sure who to talk to. What I recommend, if you have a panel interview or multiple people sitting across a room from you, is always start your eye contact with the person who asked you the question. But then as you answer the question, be sure that you're bringing in everybody in the room so that they feel like they're part of the conversation. And again, just like public speaking, you definitely don't want to do the targeted, I'm looking at you, now I'm looking at you, now I'm looking at you, and then you, where it's super obvious. I think you do want to include everybody, but you want to do it in a natural way. As you're talking, interviewers will be writing things down, and occasionally they will look up. And those are the people you kind of want to catch when they look up. And I'm doing this nodding thing that you can see. It's a separate movement. It's also a nonverbal element. It just sort of kind of suggests agreement when we're nodding with people. And so as they're asking me, a question, and I start answering, if I am giving good eye contact and also I'm nodding just a little bit, it kind of suggests that, hey, we agree, right? We're both on the same page here. So that would be eye contact. Posture, I recommend not this kind of completely straight posture because, and then your arms are it's almost robotic because it can look unnatural. So I do recommend maybe sitting with your back against the chair. If you're tall enough, then your feet can rest on the floor. I'm usually not tall enough, so my feet kind of dangle. And what I do in that instance is I then cross my legs so that I can kind of at least hold myself together. It's really important to appear that you are naturally engaged. One of the things that I do that helps me with my posture, and I'll talk about this in the next step, is I hold this portfolio. I got it, I can't remember, either like at Office Max or Walmart, but I put a copy of my resume in here, and then also it's a pad of paper with a pen so that I can ask those questions that I planned on and write answers. But I find that by holding this portfolio on the desk, if there's a desk in front of me and kind of crossing my leg, I can adjust my posture so that I appear to be just a little bit leaned back. I have my hands resting on the portfolio, but I still appear to be interested. That's very different than, again, this posture where it's almost too much, and one of these postures where it's just kind of like, hello, Miss Lady, like they do on Step Brothers. You definitely don't want to do that. Okay, so for posture, something natural. For gestures and movement, I recommend do what's natural, but be mindful of what your natural is. If you are a naturally expressive person and you're always doing some of this and a little bit of that, maybe like Kramer would be an over-exaggerated version. Maybe just be mindful of trying to have your hands kind of rest them on the desk like this. To that end, I recommend, not having a pen that clicks. I think I've got one here. You guys, I don't even know if you can hear this, but a lot of times folks will have a pen and they'll start clicking. And as you can imagine, that becomes distracting to everybody. So if you need to manage your gestures because they're overly excessive, I recommend holding a pen again or crossing your hands on either the desk or your portfolio or just even in your lap. But I wouldn't worry so much about gestures if you find that you're just kind of halfway in and you're being natural and you're paying attention to the other person and he or she doesn't appear to be distracted, then I wouldn't worry too much about it. But again, this is something to think about before the interview if you do find that you need to manage distracting behaviors or nonverbal. Okay, so we've talked about eye contact, posture, movement, and gestures. The other thing I find is somewhat common is to have a very low volume. When you use a low volume, meaning that it's hard for people to hear, it can come across as though you're not confident. And in fact, in many cases, that's where low volume comes from, is people aren't very confident in that moment. Or there could be a cultural element at play where somebody is maybe taught or lived in a situation where volume was meant to be lowered. In a job interview, you definitely want to make sure the other person can hear you. And the way that you know if the person can't hear you is because that person will either lean in and maybe put their ear toward you, or they will ask you to speak up, or they will just completely disengage. They'll just kind of check out and, maybe end the interview because they can't hear you. So definitely, if you're someone who is soft-spoken for whatever reason, you're going to probably want to start or practice doing what you feel like is yelling, but really it's just projecting to make sure that the other person can hear you okay. And of course, tone is something that you would manage just by conveying your interest. Again, these are all things that you might think, why would I put time and thought into this? And to that, I would say to you, your nonverbal communication accounts for roughly 93% of your message that you're sending. So if you can put thought into these things before you go into the interview and you have done the work, and then the next step, we'll talk about how to use your resume, you're going to come across as a more confident candidate, even if you don't feel confident. And one little side note that I've learned, depending on what outfit you're wearing, because all of your outfit choices, even including perfume, nail color, the things we talked about in the last video, all of that communicates nonverbally as well. I recommend, if you're a nervous person, try not to have any change in your pockets, because sometimes, either I notice with public speaking or also interviewing, sometimes people will put their hands in their pockets to try to manage their gestures, and then all we can think about is the change that's wrestling around. So that's just a side note. Okay, so the second major tip, we just talked about managing your nonverbal communication, and now we want to switch over to use your resume as a tool during the interview. This is something I think a lot of people don't know that they can and should do. Just because you've sent your resume into the employer and you've gotten a job interview doesn't mean the person has had the time to really read it carefully. I've been in a position to hire before, and I've had up to 200 resumes at one time. And when that happens, I try to look for reasons to screen candidates out, right? So I'm thinking, oh, the job required this degree, you don't have it, you go in the no pile. Or I'm looking for these particular skill sets, you don't have it, you go in the no pile. So I'm trying to whittle it down. And you might have ended up in this really short possible pile or yes pile, but you're still in a pile because you're getting interviewed. I recommend taking the interview as an opportunity to ensure the person has read your resume carefully. And if not, that they do so while you're in the interview. In the last video, I talked about going through your resume, kind of giving yourself some highlights or notes about places in your resume where you meet or exceed the specific job duties. So that's your tool to use during the interview, so that as the person's asking questions, you can continue to drive that person back to your interview. So let me give you some examples. If the interviewer says, "Hi, Carol, thanks for coming in. Tell me about yourself." What the person is not asking is for me to say, well, I like cookies and I have cats and I, like everyone else, like long walks on the beach, and my favorite show is Friends. That's not really what the employer is asking. In fact, every question the employer is asking is, why should I hire you? So you will want to practice using your resume to answer all of their questions. A good way to answer that question would be, oh, well, thank you so much for asking. I don't mind telling you about myself at all. I brought my resume here, and here's a copy. I noticed if you don't have one, then I want to give that to you. But if you notice, you'll see I am a college graduate, just graduated, go Devils, or whatever you would want to say. Especially if you're paying attention to what's in their environment. If they like sports, you want to connect with that. Or if the person has pictures of, I don't know, something like art or like a breast cancer walk or something like that, you can say, oh, as you can see, I volunteer or have volunteered for the last few years for the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation. And I can see that you've done some work too. So we have that in common. My degree is in communication studies, which brings me in today because I noticed that this position relies really heavily on communication. And also you can see that I've had a lot of I'm just making this up. I've had a lot of management roles, and that also brought me into you as well, because it seems that for this position, you would want someone with a lot of management experience. So whatever it is, that regardless of what the other person has asked me, I'm going to answer what it is I want to say about myself and through my resume, right? It's almost like a politician's answer. I might ask a politician, tell me about, how your thoughts on climate change. And instead of answering that question directly, maybe the person says, well, I'm glad you asked about this. We actually have this other thing coming up too. And then they go into what it is they want to say. And I'm not suggesting you be political, and I'm not suggesting you avoid the question, but I am suggesting you keep in mind what they're really asking you is, how and why are you the best candidate? And you have the proof in your resume. And I keep kind of pointing down, forgetting that you guys can't see my screen because I usually do this in person. But you can, if your resume is here and you're looking at it and that person's looking at it, you can continue to drive that person back to the resume to make sure that you cover everything that you would want to cover. And I'm just looking to see if there's something else that I wanted to say, which there is. You're going to be asked a lot of questions during the interview that might at first seem to take you by surprise, like behavioral questions maybe. I can do a whole separate session on, answering very specifically those behavioral questions. But what I would recommend is stay in the moment. Remember that you are a top candidate and you need to find out if this is a good fit for you, right? So as the person's asking you questions, you want to focus on your resume and use the content in your resume to answer the questions. You also want to be staying in the moment so that you get a feel for the culture, right? I know this sounds super easy, like when I'm in an interview, I'm so nervous, I can't really think about anything else, and I totally get that. But it is a complete mind shift, if you can do it, to go into the interview situation thinking, this is really just a conversation to see if this is a good fit between us. We're just getting to know each other. There's nothing to lose here. Because honestly, if it's not a good fit, it's great that you don't get that job, because it will not be a great experience. And in fact, you might walk away feeling a little bit blessed if you don't get that job, and you won't know until later. But there isn't really anything that the employer can ask, I believe, that you can't answer from your resume, or at least look down and get a reminder from your resume to say, there is a time I experienced that. Actually, as I'm looking here at my resume, I see, when I did this particular job, this particular thing happened. This was the outcome. It's called the STAR method, which again, I'll talk about in a separate video. And here's the result. It just gives you the comfort knowing that you have all the answers with you. You really do. And when you can have an interview and you look like you're confident, you feel confident, you've done the preparation work, it will make all the difference for you. So today we've talked about 2 things that you can do to ace the interview, and they're a little bit bigger concepts. But the first thing that I talked about was managing your nonverbal communication, each of those elements. And again, maybe practicing so that when you get to the interview, you don't feel uncomfortable using them. And then the second thing was using your resume as a tool during the interview. That just makes really great sense, and it makes you feel better. I hope that you guys have found these 2 tips helpful. I plan to submit more resumes, I plan to submit more videos for you guys. Soon I'll be talking about resumes. I already have some resume videos posted, but I've been asked if I could give you guys shorter versions. So that's where I was going with that. I will be working on new videos. Please leave a comment, a like, and a subscribe, especially if you like what I've shared, but also if you have thoughts on what you'd like to see. With that, I'll say stay safe, you guys, and good luck during your interviews. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.